These are devotions for people at a social distance. Yesterday, I had a wonderful opportunity to listen in on a lecture given by New Testament theologian Amy Jill Levine. And she was challenging us to be cautious, be careful about anti Jewish sentiments that quite unintentionally can seep into our reading of the New Testament and our preaching on the New Testament. And so it was really kind of interesting when in my devotions this morning, I read from Matthew chapter 12, starting at verse 9. It goes like this. Jesus left that place and entered their synagogue. A man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, "Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath?" so that they might accuse him. So we have this really interesting controversy that Matthew is reporting where Jesus enters into, and did you note this, their synagogue, not his synagogue, presumably, but of course Jesus is himself Jewish. So there is already in that opening phrase a little bit of animosity. There's an us versus them going on. And then they ask him, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? Now, as Amy Jill Levine pointed out, of course it is lawful to cure on the Sabbath. The Old Testament law, the consistent interpretation of the rabbis in Jewish tradition is that, yes, obviously, saving, helping, curing, healing is something that is not against the Sabbath law. But of course, we often read this as, oh, these awful Jews are so caught up in terms of keeping the Sabbath law that they're not even thinking about the needs of human beings. No, that's not really what the Jewish tradition says. Now, what goes on here? Jesus, of course, quite rightly points out what many of the rabbis would also point out, that yes, of course, we can do good on the Sabbath. We do it for our animals if they fall into a pit. Yes, we should do it for other human beings. Jesus is actually inside the Jewish tradition here. So what's going on? What's the opposition going on in this passage? Well, perhaps what's going on is this. As I said, Jesus enters into their synagogue. He is entering into some kind of social situation. And synagogue, by the way, is simply a word that means assembly. Doesn't necessarily have to mean a building. So he's gone into a situation where where somebody else is in charge. It's somebody else's meeting, and he comes with his own agenda, which is apparently about healing somebody. He disrupts the meeting with his good deeds. With his act of healing and help and salvation. They're upset with him. I mean, and who wouldn't be? Imagine somebody comes into one of our church services, say on a Sunday morning, if we could actually gather for church services, and comes in and starts doing their own thing in the midst of some service we planned. So what they might be upset with him is for disrupting what they had planned. But they turn it into a discussion on the law, because this is what we do. This is what we do. When someone inconvenient shows up, when something that we're not really looking for happens, we turn that into a discussion about what is right and what is wrong, when it's really a discussion about what is inconvenient and what we didn't want to have to deal with right now. We turn our personal wants and desires into law, and we are wrong if we do that. So I don't know, maybe one thing we can do with this passage is this. People may come into our lives, might come into our churches, might show up in our way, and we are bent on doing what we had planned to do. We have our own agenda, and yet God sends them into our path. Are we going to be open? Are we going to be ready to meet with what God has thrown into our path? Apparently, the people who had gathered on that day weren't ready, weren't open for Jesus to come along and do this act of great kindness, because they had their own agenda. It was not an issue of the law. It was an issue of what they wanted, and they mapped what they wanted onto God. That's what we shouldn't be doing. Gracious God, when things show up on our path that we hadn't planned for, that we hadn't wanted, open us up to the possibility that you may have placed those things there, and make us open to do what you're calling us to do in that moment, even if it is inconvenient and unplanned. Amen.